The name of this session is Who Are You? Now, I'm going to remind you of that old poem. I know you're probably tired of it by now, but it goes, if you want to sell Jim Jones what Jim Jones buys, you must first see Jim Jones through Jim Jones' eyes. There's so much truth to that poem to where I just feel, and it's so applicable to what we're talking about. The second thing I want to cover in this session, and you guys are going to hate me for this, I'm going to ask you to take a personality profile test. I hate the things myself. I just cringe every time I take these things. But if we're going to take that blessing to others, we must first know who we are, how we like to communicate, and then see how we could find indicators of how other people like to hear the message. So if we're going to communicate and share that blessing to others, isn't it kind of important to know who we are first and how we communicate naturally, and then what other people, how they communicate, and the best way that we could get there? So this is continuing part of that foundation of being able to take that blessing to others. Let's get started. As I just mentioned, during this lesson we're going to cover primarily two things. We're going to cover how that silly little poem of mine plays out and the disc format. Just forgive me for this. But first, before we get into that, let's look exactly what God says about different types of personalities and points of view and why He thinks it's important enough to put in the Bible. Let's see what God has to say about meeting people where they are and adjusting to their personalities to help them understand the message. I think Paul is an amazing speaker and addresses it so well. Starting with Acts chapter 17, verse 22, remember where he is. He's up on Mars Hill, about to address the men of Athens, the folks that worship all these different types of idols. He has very little in common with these people. If you recall us talking about the field of experience, their background is not monotheist like Paul, not worshiping one God, not under the law, not understanding the history of God's people from the beginning. These are heathens that come from a very different culture. About the only thing that they have in common is they're in the Roman Empire and they speak Greek together. That's their overlapping of experience. Here's what Paul does. He plays out that little silly poem that I keep sharing with you guys. Paul says, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are very religious." This is a beautiful statement of acknowledging them and seeing them through their eyes without condoning and agreeing with them. It's a beautiful statement. And then the balance of that chapter we'll get to a little bit later on in another lesson of how it plays out, and it's a beautiful exercise for all of us. And then in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 19 through 23, Paul again, he says, For though I am free from all men, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more. And to the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being under the law toward God, but under the law toward Christ, that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might be by all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I may partake of it with you. This is a prime example of mirroring, of reflecting back to individuals the same thing that they have. It's a great tool, it's a great exercise, and it acknowledges that we're not all the same, that we have different cultures, different personalities, and if we're going to share that blessing with others, then we have to meet them where they are and speak to them at their level. You know, one of the things about child rearing is little ones understand better if you get down on a knee and talk to them at their level. If you just always stand up and talk down to them, that's not building a great relationship with them. And it is just meet people where they are. Then let's wrap this up in Galatians Chapter 6, verses 6 through 10. Let him who is taught the word share in all good things with him who teaches. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that man will also reap. For he who sows to his flesh will of his flesh reap corruption, and he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. Let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially those who are of the household of faith. God is continuously telling us that it's worth the effort. Meet people where they are. Share that gospel. Share that blessing at home and at work. It is our responsibility, and God continues to remind us if He did not create a one-dimensional human race. We are not the same thing. We are not the one personality, one carbon copy of everybody else. We are of a multitude of different types of cultures, different types of personalities, and it's an opportunity to share that gospel, that blessing with others, and we should never get tired of that. My theory on this is that if God wants us to meet people where they are, then we first need to know who we are as a personality and maybe find some tips on how we can help determine how best to address others. Now, couple of things, the people that we interact with are not mind readers. If you're my age, you would say that they are not Karnak. Now, if you're under 40, you have no idea what that means. But the people that you meet every day, they're not mind readers. Your spouse is not a mind reader, neither are your children. Others perceive you by your behavior, not really your intent. Think that one through. By your behavior, not really your intent. Communication is in the mind of the receiver. Remember, I've talked a lot about that during the last lesson. And I also mentioned noise. And quite frankly, you're just making noise if the other person doesn't hear and understand you. So these things are important. That's why I want us to know who we are so that we could address who they are. And part of that is using a DISC profile. Now, the experts will tell you that DISC is not a personality assessment, and I am by no means a DISC expert. Matter of fact, what I did is I called a very good friend of mine who does these all the time, and I asked her to explain the nuances of it, to give me a better understanding. I've taken these things for years and years, and I hate them. Sorry. They're just no fun to take. Other people enjoy taking them. They think it's very cool. But I don't know. But DISC is not, they say, is not a personality assessment. but they say that DISC represents the different concepts, traits, and values played out in your interaction with others. So it does play out how you communicate. Okay? Now, a DISC understanding will help you answer 4 really good questions. And the questions are, how well am I interacting with my family and work relationships? So it helps you understand how well you're interacting with your family and work relationships. And then the second question is, how can you adapt? How can I adapt my style to meet the needs of the others? So when you go to the house, then you need to be able to communicate properly. When you go to work, you need to be able to communicate properly. And how can you share that blessing if you cannot do that? The third question that it helps to answer is, how can you best understand your family and work mates' priorities? And how can you align what you're doing to help them along? So if it helps you align yourself with them. And then the fourth question, there's a host more, but these are the 4 that I gravitate toward, is how can you tap into the communication preferences of the others? And I'll share with that in just a little bit of the different types of things that certain personalities tend to gravitate toward. And maybe you'll recognize that in yourself or possibly others that you work with or live with. For instance, a D style has a few characteristics that we need to take into account. Remember that your indifference or frustration for others who need more social interaction than you. Let that one sink in. Remember, your pace toward goals is likely faster than those around you. Now think about those 2 things real quick. So that's the D style, the dominant style. Influence. Here's a couple of tips for you. Remember, your focus is on the future may be hard for others to see when they are focused on current tasks or issues. Also, remember, others need time to prepare their thoughts for conversations versus your tendency to think while you discuss them. Either of those hit home for you. If so, then you may be an influence, an I style. I got a tip for the steadiness style. Keep in mind your lack of assertiveness may be construed as agreement to issues. Now, if you're trying to communicate that blessing or trying to share your thoughts there and you're not very assertive with it, then they may think that you're agreeing with them. So you want to be careful there. And then the last one is consciousness, the C style. And got a couple of tips here. Remember, your pace toward goals may be slower than those around you because you process and have more reliability is more important than that. Remember, others don't need as much time to prepare their thoughts for conversations versus your tendency to analyze your thoughts before speaking up. So imagine a C style having a conversation and planning activities with a D style. That is going to be an interesting conversation, and interesting could possibly mean not a very good thing. So those are some of the examples of a DISC personality. They represent the different concepts and traits. They're a level of your uniqueness. And remember that this stuff is not written in stone. Each of us have different personalities. Some of them are more dominant than others. Let me rephrase that. Each of us have all of these different types of traits in our personality. That's a better description. We all have these traits. We just gravitate toward some more than others. And that comes out in how we plan things, how we treat others, how we talk, how we act. And that's how they can label or type or style as a D, a I, a S, or C. And often when these experts are talking about the different people they're working with, they'll label out all four of these initials in the order that you tested highest. So I think that's really interesting. So it's good material. It's good for you to know who you are so that you could follow the Lord's will so that we can communicate and share that blessing with others. Here is where the fun begins. We're going to take a test. But before we take this test, I'd like to give you 4 tips on how you could possibly figure out what the other individual, what their style is just by looking at them and interacting with them. If they're a D style, then they tend to be more fast-paced. Their structure when they stand is a more of a firm stance, and they tend to have stronger gestures. And then if it's an I style, an influence style, they have that easy smile. I'm always jealous of the folks with that easy smile. They have very alert eyes, but they have these wide gestures about them. So that's a very interesting style. The S style, they have that direct look, that direct gaze, a very relaxed stance, and they really don't have very many gestures about them. And then a C style, they're much more reserved. Their eyebrows are raised, and their gestures are very controlled and well thought out. Those are just some 4 little tips of how to spot a personality, a style of from the disc, just by their posture and how they communicate with you physically, moving their hands, the way they stand, the way they look at you. Now here's the test. You see it on the screen here. And what I'll do is I'll also put a link to a Google sheet that you could download this and complete it, along with a workbook that my friend gave me that has the different styles in a little bit more deeper detail than I wanted to share with you because I didn't want you to go to sleep. But then at the end of it is a little worksheet of the personal application for me and personal application for your team, and substitute family/team on that. But let's talk about this test. Okay, it's just a set of questions here. You have the 4 columns, and what I ask is that in each of these columns, you score this from a scale from 1 to 4, with 4 being the most like you. So let's look at pace, the 3rd row down. Is your pace faster or slower? So you would put, for me, I think it would be, my pace is pretty rapid, I would think. So I would put 4, 4, and 1, 1 of that. Okay. Other people may be, no, I like to think things through and act when it's appropriate. So they would reverse that. So take this test, put the numbers associated with the answers that meets your needs, your thoughts, and then tally the columns, and that will give you a sequence of which ones you're most like all the way down to the one that are not like or least like. And just as I mentioned earlier, the experts will list you out as all 4 styles, but they'll put them in sequential order of which is your highest, most dominant style down to your least dominant style. The hint here is it will help you understand who you are, and then how can you start meeting people where they are. And it could possibly help you understand their personality just by better understanding yours. Now, my good friend who gave me this test, this material, wanted me to share with you this is a very simple test. The normal test is significantly longer and much more scientific, but this, she says, is extremely useful. She actually uses this with her congregation, and so they use it internally as well. So I thought that was a good start for the conversation to begin with. Also, if you want to go online, you could take a DISC profile test online for free. The problem with that is, the reason why I haven't sent you to one of those, you have to give up your email address for that, and then you will be on their email list. So you may not want to do that. So yeah, just take my little test. This will be good enough for now. And then if you want to go deeper, then we can. All right, guys, take the test. Find out how that best interacts with you. If you want to pop me an email to let me know how you think that you scored and how you could possibly help address others, that would be wonderful. As a recap, I want us to all remember that God did not create a one-trick pony. He created the human race to have different styles, different points of view, different personality styles. He filled the globe with us so that we have all these different types of field of experiences, different modes of communication. It's an amazing thing that our Creator has done. Now, if we want to take that gospel that we've been commanded to do to every tribe and every creature on the globe, then we must first begin with ourselves to understand how we communicate and our internal style so that we can meet people where they are and spread that blessing that we intend to do. Next lesson, I'm really excited because it's taking the four Gospels and seeing how God took each of these personality styles, the DISC, the DISC styles, and told the story of Jesus and met his creation where they are. It's an amazing thing. He meets each of our styles in the format, the structure, the story type, the way that we all would receive it. And I hope you enjoyed as much as I do. Thanks.